Good morning.
Good morning.
The author of Psalm 39:1 states, I'll watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I'll put a muzzle on my mouth as long as the wicked are in my presence. I'll keep my tongue from sin. I'll put a muzzle on my mouth. The psalmist here is referring to silence. Although it's a difficult lesson for some to learn, sometimes being silent at certain times is the most beneficial thing we can be. I believe there's many bad situations that have happened to individuals that may not have happened had they remained silent instead of speaking. I believe many times in the history of the world, rather than remaining silent, people have said things they shouldn't have said, and it made matters only worse. The psalmist in Psalm 39 writes, I'll put a muzzle on my mouth. He was determined to keep his tongue from sin. He was determined to control his tongue. Now, James emphasizes this in James chapter 3, verses 3 to 8. James declares, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships for an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants them to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider when a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. And that's strong language. A world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of life on fire, and is itself on fire by hell. At first, it seems that James might be exaggerating a little bit to make his point. That's a common literary technique, hyperbole. But in truth, poor use of words can have a devastating effect on our lives. I mean, do we know how many wars throughout history has just started by words? A huge amount of fights have begun with words as well. Many friendships, many friendships have broken up and been lost because of lack of self-control in regard to speaking. People lost their jobs because of the failure to control speech. And most importantly, many people have lost their ability to be a Christian witness because of their language. I mean, let us think about it. Would we be more likely to go to someone for spiritual advice on matters who had a firm control over their tongue? Or who said something obscene every other word? Many unbelievers know the Ten Commandments. Many unbelievers know that a Christian is breaking the Ten Commandments every time they say the Lord's name in vain. Why do so many Christians, not unbelievers, why do so many Christians say the Lord's name in vain? Out of all the words they can use. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. If it's not that big of a deal, why is it one of the Ten Commandments? Would we be likely to share confidential information with someone that we think gossips a lot? Would we be more willing to share information with someone that we know talks about people when they're not present? Would we be more likely to open up to ourselves when we're speaking with someone who's arrogant in speech or someone who's more humble? Would we be more likely to go to advice for someone on a difficult subject who jumps to conclusions without hearing all the facts, rather than someone who soaks up all the information and then thinks and prays first and then speaks? Would we be more open to go to someone for advice who encourages or criticizes? I think it's clear who most of us would turn to for advice or encouragement or help. It's clear who other people would turn to also. If we keep our words righteous and clean, we will have far more opportunities to witness for Jesus Christ than if we use our tongues as loose cannons. What we say is very important. Now we have a habit of thinking that's not what we say, it's what you do that matters. Well, I mean, that phrase is half true. What we do does matter. But what we say also matters. As many great words have been undone by poor actions, many great actions have been undone by poor words. It happens every day. Our words matter. They can undo a lot of good works. I believe that's why the Psalm 17:3 states, "Though you probe my heart and examine me at night, though you test me, you'll find nothing. I have resolved that my mouth will not sin." Psalm 141:3 states, "Set a guard over my mouth, O Lord. Keep watch over the door of my lips." We're not talking about a small biblical theme here. We should understand that our words matter very much. Our words have the power to glorify God, or they have the power to bring dishonor to God. I believe that's why we need to ask God to guide us sometimes during certain communication. If we truly lean on God's wisdom and listen to God, then perhaps He would be telling us that it's better to be silent more times than not in difficult situations. We should remain silent when we're around people that have loose lips. We should remain silent when we're around people who make it their life's work to gossip. I mean, gossip really is one of the easiest ways to grow trust. You know, there was somebody in a church in Salem, West Virginia, and I went through, the story is not to point me as a hero, because I wasn't a hero, because I manipulated the situation, but there was a person in Salem, West Virginia, that I knew could not keep a secret. I knew they couldn't. And I went through a life situation that was difficult. And I didn't really, and I knew that whatever you think it is, it's not serious. But if you want to ask me about it, I'll tell you personally, but, I don't. Anyway, I didn't want to go through the pain of telling every person in the church. So there's one individual I called, and I informed the individual, and I emphasized that it's confidential, and the more I emphasized it was confidential, the more I knew they would tell people. And so, what ended up happening was I told this one person. I never had to tell anyone else in the church. Everyone knew, not to ask him about it because it was hurtful, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I'm not the hero in that situation because I manipulated someone else's sin, and that's wrong, and I know that's wrong. But if someone thinks of us as someone that, if I tell them something, and they're that person that will tell everyone else, and if I tell them it's confidential and it'll just make it worse, let us not be like that. But then also let us not be like me either, and let us not use that. Let us not manipulate us. Sometimes we have to speak truth and love to somebody else. And if someone does gossip, and someone does share confidential information, the Bible teaches us that sometimes we need to correct somebody. And that would be something that we would need to correct. And I should have corrected rather than manipulated. So that's why I'm not the hero either. One of my favorite books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Stephen Covey. If you haven't read it, it's a good read. I recommend it. And in his book, he writes about trust. Now, that's one of the habits. How we should value trust. And he speaks of making a trust bank. and how gossip can actually destroy the trust other people have in us. He writes, and this is quote, "One of the most important ways to manifest integrity is to be loyal to those who are not present. In doing so, we build the trust of those who are present. When you defend those who are absent, you retain the trust of those present." Suppose you and I were talking alone and we were criticizing our supervisor in a way that we would not do so if he were present. Now, what will happen when you and I have a falling out? You know I'm going to be discussing your weaknesses with someone else. That's what you did and I did behind our supervisor's back. You know my nature. I sweet talk to your face and badmouth you behind your back. You see me do it. That's the essence of duplicity. Does that build a reserve of trust in my account with you? Obviously not. At times, silence is so far better than speaking. Often it is when we have the urge to criticize somebody else. In this world, there's so many times people get the rules mixed up. The rule of judge is the rule that's already taken. And when we die, we're going to figure out who has that role. And it's not us. That role belongs to God. I believe when we remain silent, it's better to remain silent. We're around chronic complainers. Now, we all know that there's some people that at 69 degrees is too cold, and at 70 degrees is too warm. And if we just go along with it, it just adds to the complaint. Wouldn't it be better if we just remain silent? Or instead of just going along with the complaining, if we added praise, thankfulness to God, and gratefulness or humility to that? But so many times, so many people just go along with it. It's just they build up the complaints. And it dishonors God. It really does. We should not add fuel to the fire. Because the truth is that life is so short. I mean, I was thinking that last week. The kids, I mean, they really humbled me by, they sang for my birthday and gave me a card, and then, there was cupcakes provided. And friends, that feels like it was 2 days ago. I can't believe that was 7 days ago. I mean, time goes so fast. For me, my weeks revolve really around Wednesday and Sunday. Those are my two biggest days. And I just can't believe how fast this world, our lives really are short. They just pass, they keep on going. They just pass us by. And we can either get ourselves and everybody around us down and complain about everything that's wrong about the world, or we can set our mind on praising what's good. And if Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, then we have far more good occurring in our lives than negative. I believe that we should remain silent over than speaking when we're overly angry. Sometimes when we're angry, we overreact. Sometimes we just want to get even with somebody, but we never really get even. Usually if someone says something and we lash back, normally sometimes when we lash back, we go beyond what they initially did. And because we went beyond it, well, then they want to get us back. And then they get us back a little bit more, so that it's just an endless cycle. They could just stop if we just remain silent. Now, I'm not saying, as I said earlier, that there's not a time to correct. I'm not saying there's not a time that we shouldn't speak harshly. Jesus spoke harshly at times. Now, sometimes we over-evaluate how many times he actually did speak harshly. It really wasn't that often, but he did. He chose his times wisely. He did it when it was needed. But I think it would be rewarding for all our relationships if we never said anything too harsh on the spur of the moment. The first book I wrote by David Ramsey is a financial book. And And he said, one thing that I remember from that book by David Ramsey, is he said you should never buy something too much. I think he used over $300. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I read it. But one thing, he said you should never make a big purchase on the spur of the moment, whether it's a washer and dryer or a car or whatever. Before you make a big purchase, you should go home, get a good night's sleep, and sleep on it. Then after you wake up the next day, if you still feel like you need to purchase that item, then do it. But do it after a good night's sleep. I think we should use that same rule when we want to correct somebody or when we want to say something harsh. If something has to be said, I think sometimes instead of overreacting and saying something on the spur of the moment, all our relationships would be so much better if we went home, if we reflected in prayer and scripture reading, and we got that good night's sleep. And we woke up the next day, and it was still needed, and we felt in our hearts that God still wanted us to say it, then do it. But so many things change. A good night's sleep has a way of diffusing so many different things. What James says that like a forest can be set on fire by a spark. Our tongue sometimes can be that spark. Why is it so important for so many people to get in the last word in an argument? What really good does the last word do? Really? Is it ego? Arrogance? Pride? I mean, it doesn't really do anything in the last word in. Jody and I, we take Ragnar for a walk every night, unless it's raining. During snow we do, but if the roads are icy we don't. If it's raining we don't, but every other night we do. He's a lucky dog. We take him for a walk every night, and there's this thing with Ragnar that he's usually not the first dog to bark at another dog, but he'll try to be the last dog that barks. So we'll be walking, and the dog barks at him. He'll always bark back, and he'll always bark back, and we can be clear up the street, and I'm pulling him, and he's facing the other direction, and he'll like lean back just to bark, and that other dog barks, and we'll be like half the street away. I mean, it's so important for him to get that last bark in. Did God create humans in the image of God? Didn't God create humans with the ability to critically think? To be able to reason? Shouldn't we be better than dogs as far as getting the last word in? Really? I mean, really? What good is it really to get the last word in? It's overrated. Peter writes in 1 Peter 2, 20-23, "But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, that is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in him. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly." Peter was straightforward. We should follow in Jesus' footsteps. Jesus was silent before Herod and Pilate when we read those accounts. He was silent when he was cursed by the soldiers at the cross. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When they caused him to suffer, he didn't threaten them, and he could have made threats, and he could have backed up those threats. He was God. And he didn't. Some of the things that have gotten Christians so upset in the history of the world have been so petty in the larger landscape of things. Jesus was innocent of everything. He never even sinned. Never sinned. The only person ever to never sin. And he was cursed. He was humiliated. He was murdered. The only person ever to sin. If anyone had a reason to do things out of anger, to speak out of anger, it was Jesus. And Peter just told us what Jesus did when he was being tested, when he was being crucified. In words, we need to not retaliate back. Now, I know it's difficult. Following Jesus is difficult. It's an impossible task to follow Jesus exactly. But still, it's what Jesus calls us to do, to follow him. Let us focus on sharing the love of God when we're in conflict. Our words, they can do a lot of good, or they can do a lot of harm. That's why we should be very careful when speaking. And we're going to say something negative. We really need to be careful. Is it worth it? Is it a worthy cause? And most of the time, we might find out that it's not. Our tongues have the ability to be avenues for the Holy Spirit to convict souls on behalf of Jesus Christ. And our tongues have the power to turn people away from Jesus Christ. I have talked to many people who don't even go to church, and the reason they don't go to church is because for some reason, some Christian has somehow offended them. Now, I use it as a cop-out that you don't go to church because you don't go to any church because one Christian at one church offended you. But that's an excuse that many people use. Yes, I think there's part of it that's a cop-out. But still, let it not be a cop-out they can point at us. People claim that there are a lot of people that claim they don't go to any church because one Christian offended them. Let us not be that one Christian. When we say something, in no way should it be anything that can diminish how someone views Jesus Christ. You know, I read a book called The Peacemaker by Ken Sande. And it's a great book, and I'll probably refer back to that in other sermons because it was a really good book. But he made his thesis of his book was this: when we're in conflicts with one another, usually our culture has us with this mindset: I gotta win, you gotta lose. I'm going to get my way, and I don't really care if you get our way. That's what the world teaches. That's how conflicts usually are. And his whole point is this: that's not what Jesus wants. When we're in a conflict with somebody, instead of being focused on getting our way, we should be focused on what best scenario best glorifies God. Not even on that win-win situation. Stephen Covey in 7 Habits, he says the win-win solution. But not even that's the best scenario. The best scenario is what glorifies God the best.